Okay, so we've spent a bit of time and effort setting things up, and when we do work like this, we spend a bit of time setting something up. The goal of this is to make something reusable that we can use over and over again very easily. And that's what we've done here. So what we'll do, we'll go across to our iUser repository first of all, because we're going to change the return type for what we're doing with our getMembers. So instead of returning an IEnumerable of a member DTO, what we're going to do now is we're going to return a paged list, our new class that we created inside our helpers folder. And what we're also going to do is we're going to take in some user parameters. So we'll take in our user params and we'll call it user params. We're not allowed to call it params, by the way. This is like a reserved word. So we have to call it something other than params. So we'll call it user params. And then we can go across to our user repository. And inside here, we'll update our getMembers async. Because we've added params to this now, we need to do the same inside our user repository. Because at the moment, this will show that we've got an error because it doesn't implement our interface as it is now. And it tells us what the problem is. Our getMembers async requires user params. So we'll come down here and we'll say user params, which we'll need to bring in from our helpers folder. And we'll call it user params once again. So what we're going to do from this, we're going to remove the toList async. And what we're also going to do is not return at this stage. What we're going to do is say var query equals. And if we take a look at the type that the query is at this stage, before we've done anything else, then our query is a type of iQueryable. And that's what we were talking about earlier on. This is an expression tree that's going to go to our database, or entity framework is going to build up this query as an expression tree. And then when we execute the toList async, that's when it goes and executes the request in our database. So this is now an iQueryable. What we can also specify inside here to be even more efficient is that by default, when we go and get entities from Entity Framework applies tracking to these entities. Now, because this is going to be a list that we only ever read from, and in fact, talking of lists, this needs to be a paged list that we're returning here now. Because this is something that we're only ever going to read from, we're not going to do anything with these entities. What we could do as well is specify as no tracking. And this turns off the tracking in Entity Framework. So all we need to do is read this. We don't need to do anything else. And what we can do then, now that we have this in place, we can come down and return. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say return await. And then we're going to use our paged list class. And then we specify what type of paged list do we want. Now, in this case, what we want is a paged list of our member DTOs. And because we created a static method on our paged list called createAsync, this gives us the facility to create a paged list at this stage in our repository. So we'll use createAsync, and our list of our source queryable is going to be our query. So we're going to pass our query into this. And then we're going to specify the user params.page number, and then the user params.page size. And this is what we return from our repository method. So we're going to get a paged list, and then we create this paged list and pass in those parameters. And if we go and take a look at the createAsync method, we'll just put our cursor in createAsync and press F12. Then we receive our source and our page number and our page size. And then we execute our request. And as I mentioned, we've got no choice but to make two queries to our database here. We want to get the count of the potential total items that are going to be returned. And then we execute the query along with the skip and the take parameters, and then we execute this to a list. So inside our user repository, we're no longer executing this, we're simply passing this to another method that's going to execute the toList async. So what we also need to do is add this information that we get back from our page list into our response header. So what we'll do is we'll head over to our user controller, and inside here, of course, we need to get our parameters. So what we'll do, inside our getUsers method, we're going to say user params, and say user params, and we'll need to bring this in from our API helpers. And then we can pass these user params to our getMembers async method. Now our users now, this users variable, is now a paged list of type member.dto. And what this means is that we've got our pagination information inside here as well. So what we can do is we can get access to our response, which we have inside our controllers. We've always got access to the HTTP request response stuff inside here, and what we can do is say add pagination header, which is the extension method we created, and this takes the int of our current page, the items per page, the total items, and the total pages. And our users property, because it's a page list, is going to have this information inside it. So what we'll do is we'll say users dot current page, we'll say users dot page size, then users dot total counts, and users dot total pages, and add a semicolon at the end. And let's move some of this down because the lines are getting longer. And then we just return our users from this method. So because we're in an API controller and we're using that API controller attribute, this controller should be smart enough to recognize when we send up query string parameters, and it's going to match them inside here. Or it should do, but we're sending this up as an object, and query string parameters can also go as individual properties here. So we'll see how we get on. So what we'll do is we'll go across to Postman and test list functionality, and what we'll do first of all, inside section 13, we'll just get a list of our users without no query string attached to our request, and we'll click on send, and we're getting an unsupported media type. Aha! So our API controller is not that smart. And let's just double check our request first of all. So we're making a get to API users, and if we take a look at this request, this is our HTTP get inside our users controller. And it's got a problem with our parameters. And in this case, because it's a query string, we're going to need to specify from query. We're going to have to give our API controller this attribute, so it's going to get the user parameters from the query string. And this is just because a query string itself doesn't need to be inside an object, so it's not sure what to do with this. So we're going to give it some extra help by adding that attribute. So let's give that another go. And this time we get success. And I should mention, I should probably be more accurate there, because we didn't supply anything in the query string, and we've got the user params object there, then that's the reason it got confused. And it's okay with that being empty, but it just didn't know what to do in that case, and adding the from query guarantees that our request works. So what we should find anyway, first of all, is that we're only getting 10 users in this request. So let's scroll down to the bottom, and in my case I know I've got more than 10 users, but in this case I can only visibly see in the body of the request 10 users. And if we take a look at the headers that we get back from the server now, we've got 2 additional headers. We've got the access control expose headers for the pagination, and then we've got our pagination header, and we can see the current information for the pagination. Now in my case I've got total items of 13 users, but the items per page is 10, so that's all the users that we actually see. And let's go and take a look at another request, and this time we're adding pagination information on here. Now I've got a page size of 100, but we don't have 100 users, so what I'm going to do is set the page size to 5, and page number 1, and let's make sure we can use these parameters to get the correct paging back from our server. So in this case, what we've got, if I scroll down, I'm expecting to see 5 users now, and we finish at the ID of user number 5. So far so good. If I change the page number, and we can also specify the params inside this part, and if I change the page number to 2 and click send, then what we should do is get users number 6 through to number 10. And we do. And if we take a look at the headers, then we can see that the current page is now 2, The items is still 5 per page, total items is still 13, and the total pages this time is 3. Because we've got a third page, and if I select the third page, then and click send, then we're going to get our third page of users in the body here, and we see user from 11 through to 13. So this is all looking good, but there's one thing I don't particularly like, and that's the JSON response for our header being in title case. I want this to be in camel case. So what we'll do, we'll just head back to VS Code and we'll make a small adjustment to our HTTP extensions here. And what we'll do, below the pagination header, we'll add some options and say var options equals new JSON serializer options. And inside here, what we can do is specify our property naming policy, and we could say this is equal to JSON naming policy.camelcase. And then what we do is we pass these options to our serialize method, and we'll just pass it the options here. And we need to add the semicolon here to remove the error. So with this in place, what we should be able to do now is test to make sure we're getting the pagination information exactly how we want it. So I'll click on send, and now we can see that this is in camel case, and I just prefer to work with it that way in our client application. It's not compulsory. We could use this in title case, but I'm fussy about JSON. So what we'll take a look at next is setting this up in the client.